We are talking about the movie The Lullaby. This one directed by Darrell Roodt. And it's actually a South African ghost story, so to speak. It focuses on a young woman called Chloe, who was a teenage runaway, and she returns home being pregnant, just about to give birth. And she has this baby and ultimately feels like life is on top of her. She's had a variety of difficult experiences in her youth, and now she has to deal with a baby. She's not ready for it. She is very kind of depressed. She feels like her world is crumbling in on around her, and the baby is giving her no respite, causing her to have very kind of sleepless nights, etc. And she starts to see this figure, this kind of woman in black, who seems to ultimately want to cause her and her baby some harm. We also learn that there's this kind of this legend around the area where years and years ago, ultimately there was an invading force of British, and they raped the kind of like the townswomen and the people, the women who ultimately gave birth to these, by rape ultimately sacrificed the baby because they thought they were against God. And there's this kind of potential legend that may come into effect here. And it really asks the question, is Chloe simply losing her mind and is imagining all this and simply going deeper and deeper into madness? Or is there genuinely some kind of malevolent, supernatural entity that wants to cause her and her family some harm? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss The Lullaby. I would say, on one hand, this movie is a beautifully shot, ethereal, dreamlike horror movie. But on the other hand, it's a woman who is consistently screaming throughout the whole movie and is ultimately quite annoying. So let's go into a little bit more detail, shall we? On the plus side, this film is a very kind of good looking film. I feel the artistic direction here really does kind of give it this very kind of like dreamlike feel to it. And there's often soft kind of lighting, there's a lot of kind of slow-mo here. The camera is very kind of strategically placed and certain angles sometimes, and we'll have deliberate kind of like shots where things will be out of focus and kind of focusing to give it this kind of like this strange feeling. And ultimately what it's trying to tell you is that they're kind of trying to give you the feeling of this desperation and how this woman's mind is working, because everything feels so kind of like off kilter ultimately. So the film does a good job of really, without beating you over the head of it, putting you in the driver's seat of Chloe and making you feel like she really is this kind of like in this strange, surreal environment ultimately. So it does a good job of that, and it looks great, I've got to say. When we do see our supernatural shenanigans on screen, I actually feel they work pretty well. They look pretty damn menacing, and it does a good job of really kind of like giving you some quite creepy moments here, without kind of too many sort of like typical kind of jump scares and things like that. So that was all pretty good. I have to say, the acting is, I'm kind of torn on. I think the acting in some aspects is actually quite good. But there is something which I'll come on to in the negatives where I'll touch on it again. But I feel Chloe did a good job of kind of expressing this angst and this kind of like this pain that she's kind of feeling. And I think also hand in hand with that is the kind of like the makeup department, who really make her look quite washed out and almost like she's a heroin addict, because she constantly looks like a recovering drug addict ultimately. But I've got to say, moving on to the negatives here, this movie has some strange decision in regard to the acting, because I've got to say nearly all of the acting is either at a whisper or it's shouting. There's no like regular talking in this movie, or doesn't seem to be, especially with our lead character Chloe. She literally either whispers her lines and you're kind of sat there going, what was she saying? Blah! But then she'll start screaming and look at the shit, and you turn the volume down. I don't remember once really hearing her just talk at regular pitch ultimately, so it's quite distracting. And I've got to say, this girl screams so much throughout this film. It's actually just like one screaming scene after another, after another, after another, and I've got to say, it became a little tiresome. I've got to say as well, I think the movie fancied itself as maybe a little bit too arty. There are quite a few instances of these kind of artistic shots and stuff, but man, come on, how much slow-mo do we actually need? It almost feels like if you were to run this at normal speed, the movie would probably lose about 20 minutes because there's so much kind of slow-mo here. And I've got to say as well, it's kind of, it doesn't really give you all of maybe the answers that you want, and people act in this kind of like weird, almost Twin Peaks sort of style way for no real reason. You know, we have this kind of doctor who is just acting weird, but you know, it's just, why are you acting like this? It's just kind of, it seems odd. Everyone acts very kind of off kilter, and again, I understand that it's meant to be through the lens of Chloe, who is ultimately really having a hard time with things, but it sometimes makes for quite a odd experience. I've got to say it's a little slow at times, but on a technical side, like I've said, this movie does look the business. I thought they do a good job of really kind of selling on some great visuals here. I think the artistic direction is fantastic. I think the cinematography is great. I feel some of the storytelling and some of the acting choices here do let it down in some degree, but nevertheless, it's a good looking movie with some good sort of supernatural and ghostly effects. I feel maybe the story and acting do let it down somewhat though, so I will give it a 6 out of 10. If you like maybe a classic style ghost story, slow moving kind of like haunting film, then you may want to check it out. But if you're easily irritated by stuff, then I'm going to say this woman's going to bother you. So 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.